For this episode, I will be talking about therapy, my own experience when it comes to therapy. I will be discussing about the process slash procedure of seeking help from the moment you contact the place where you'll be getting your therapy. So the whole procedure from the intake interview, the forms that you have to fill in or fill out. I will talk about some of my experiences during my therapy sessions, the things that I've been learning. Also, I will talk about the benefits of going to therapy, why it may help you. And lastly, I will talk about whether or not do you need to go to therapy? Is therapy for everyone? If you are curious and you finally want to seek professional help and you want kind of an insight on the experience of someone who is actually going to therapy, this episode is for you. So keep on listening. Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Lei. I'm a mental health slash self-development advocate, and this is the second episode of my podcast. At the same time, if you're watching this on YouTube, hello. Make sure to subscribe and support my content. So the general aim of my content is to show you my journey towards healing, and to make sure that I'm showing the perspective of someone who's actually going through the shit and not someone who's enlightened. Because I feel like oftentimes, especially online on social media, whenever we hear or listen to a lot of motivational speakers and all that, we feel like they've had it all figured out and that growth and healing is linear or whatever, but it's not. And I'm one of those people who's like actually going through the shit right now as we speak. So I'm not, whatever it is that you see me talking about, I'm not coming from a place of someone who has it all together, someone who figured it out, someone who cracked the code, and it's like someone who's living already in the enlightened path. So that's not me. So if you're like me who's going through the shit, my content is for you. So first, you guys, when I say therapy, I mean psychotherapy, and that means you seeking professional help from people that are licensed and trained to address or help you guide it through your trauma. So just a general information when it comes to the procedure of seeking therapy. The first step is the moment you contact the place where you will get your potentially getting therapy from, they will ask you either through email, through phone, or whatnot. You will be asked general questions. What happened with me with my previous experiences is that I got a call from an admin from that place, and they ask you why are you interested in seeking therapy. So just like a brief interview, and then after the initial contact, you will be sent some papers. For me, I was sent like 3 documents, I think. So the documents are, the first one, it's like a more in-depth details about you. They're going to ask you are you working, the kind of relationships that you have, meaning are you living with family members, do you have your familial background, do you have family members that have mental health issues, are you currently on medications. So another document is kind of like a more specific questionnaire regarding your stress level. Like there's going to be a scale where you have to fill in like on a scale of 1 to 5, how stressed are you, or questions like that, or do you feel, are you having suicidal thoughts right now? So another document that you will need to fill in is a consent form slash confidentiality form that has statements such as whether or not you agree to, for example, everything that will be discussed in your interview will be confidential between you and the therapist. There's also an option on whether or not you want your case to be discussed in studies in the future. Also, there's another thing where it says that everything that you open up will only be between you and the therapist, no other parties, except for two main things. The first one is if you tell them that you are already planning to harm yourself. And then the second part of that is whether or not you're planning to harm other people. And then after you fill out these forms, you send it back to the admin for what they call an intake interview. So in the intake interview, you will be asked to go through everything you just wrote in the forms, the one that you submitted and you filled out. And with my recent therapy experience, it took like 1.5 hours. The whole interview, it took 1.5 hours. But for some, it's like less than an hour, and it's even more expensive. But yeah, that was my experience. And what happened was, after the interview, your whole profile will be assessed by either that person who interviewed you or by their head, or whoever is assigned, and they will try to assess your case on whether or not they will take you in, and also who is the right therapist for your specific case. So there's that. And then after that one, you will be contacted. I think the whole process would probably take 1 week from the moment you contact them, 1 to 2 weeks. So it's gonna take some time. And so after the intake interview, you will be assessed, and then the admin will contact you, and they would tell you you're assigned to this specific therapist, and then you will be scheduled for your first therapy session with that therapist. Also, during the interview, you will be asked if you have a specific preference for a therapist, meaning do you want it to be male, do you want it to be female, do you want it to be religious sensitive, and all that. So all of that, you can absolutely say it during your intake interview. And then after the intake interview, that's when the actual therapy happens. So your first ever session, like actual therapy session, this is not the interview anymore, okay? This is the actual therapy session. And that's your opportunity to assess whether or not you're feeling your therapist, because they will actually tell you this one, that if during your first session you're not feeling the therapist, you can contact the admin and tell them, I want another therapist. You don't have to even say the reason. You just have to tell them if you're not feeling it. Because remember, this is your healing journey. You're basically gonna open up your life to this person. So if you have that gut feeling that nope, this relationship is not gonna work, you have to contact the admin. And also in my case, the therapist told me about that too, because also on their end, if during your first session with the therapist, they feel like they won't be able to help you, or they're not the right person to guide you through your healing, you will also be assigned to another therapist. So it goes both ways. And so I have read online about stories of people seeking help and they had issues with their therapist, so it wasn't a good relationship. So try to gauge and assess yourself on the information that you share with your therapist, especially during your first session, because that's when you will kind of get a feel of whether or not you will be able to work with this person harmoniously. And again, always remember that this is, you have a say on this is your healing. So you're entitled to the right person to guide you through your healing. So this is very important. Just be mindful of the information that you share during the first one, because you still don't know how that therapist will respond to everything that you open up. So imagine if you open up everything all at once. And that's what I did. That's what I learned along the way, is to not share everything all at once. The key here is self-awareness, being mindful during your first session, and at the end of your session, try to assess the whole conversation, your dynamic between you and your therapist, and whether or not you're feeling it. Because if you're not, then you can always move on to another one. So yeah, that's a pro tip for me. And then during the first session also, since you're only being introduced to each other, you and the therapist, you will be asked almost the same question, but this is your opportunity to kind of also ask your therapist their expertise or regarding your trauma and how you want your therapy to move forward. The more specific you are towards what your goal is in therapy, the more the therapist can kind of, how do you say it, customize the sessions for your specific trauma. So that's very important. Take that opportunity, especially the first session, to kind of ask questions, especially if it's going to help you clarify and kind of assess whether or not this thing is for you. Usually it's gonna take like 4 sessions at least for you to kind of get a feel of whether or not it's working for you. Really, at the end of the day, it all depends on you and your commitment to this new thing that you're trying to explore. So it's all up to you. But always remember that you're paying this person, so you have a say on how this goes. But at the same time, in therapy, sometimes you will hear things you don't want to hear, but it's up to you to kind of assess whether or not it's something that is constructive and helpful or not helping you. So now we move on to why therapy. So here are some few things that I have kind of realized along the way while seeking therapy and why it's helpful. First is self-awareness / self-discovery. Through therapy, not only therapy actually, I also want to acknowledge my own personal efforts. Because again, you guys, also I want to say this. Always remember that a therapy session is only 1 hour of your time. So imagine 365 days a year, and let's say you go at least once a month. So that's only 12 hours of your life. So the moment you leave that room, it's all up to you at the end of the day whether or not you will apply everything that you've been learning in therapy. So for me, I just want to acknowledge that yes, therapy helps, but I do have my own personal efforts, that there is an initiative on my end to also get better. So even if the therapy session is only for an hour, whenever I go home and I try to live my life, I try to apply it and actually do something about it. You know what I mean? So self-awareness and self-discovery is one of the benefits of going through therapy. You get to explore and get to know yourself more. One way of doing that is this is one of the most important kind of thing that I have, this is one of the main things that I have learned, I have been learning in therapy, is that when you go to therapy, you get to verbalize what you are going through. And that is very eye-opening. And by that, I mean, for example, in my case, okay, I have anxiety, I have PTSD from my past experiences. But those traumas that I have in the past and I'm still kind of going through, I never got to say them out loud. They were in my head. I got to experience them, but there's something very profound in saying something out loud and hearing yourself say it. Like, for example, there's this there's a skill that I learned in therapy. It's called mood journaling. So basically what happens is whenever I feel anxious or I feel down, I have a small notebook and I write down what's happening or what happened and what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking in that specific moment. So, and then my therapist asked in one of the sessions, she asked, like, can I see your notes? Then, sis, of course, it's like my notes are like my diary. So she took that, I gave it to her with my, with my own will. And then she read it out loud. And when I heard her say what I wrote, oh my God, I started sort of crying because it's the first time hearing someone else say how I talk to myself. Okay, one of the examples is I wrote, I feel ugly. I feel I'm not good enough. I feel unworthy. I've never said that out loud, but I would sometimes or most of the times I would think that about myself, but I never said it out loud. But it's weird hearing her say it, hearing someone say how I talk to myself, hearing the way I talk to myself from another person. It's so weird because it's like cringy and uncomfortable because you're like, how I felt was like, oh my God, that's how I sound like, that's how I talk to myself. No fuck. So yeah, it's I don't know, there's something very profound at the same time uncomfortable and empowering to that. Or another example would be, for example, something happened to you in the past, right? And oftentimes we don't get to hear ourselves say that it happened because we don't want it to feel like, oh, it's real, it actually happened to me. And again, it's very, very eye-opening, really. And that's what I love about therapy, is it allows you to be in a space where you get to be validated, like your traumas, everything, all the shit that you go through, even the stupidest little things that you think about, you get to verbalize that. It's very life-changing. Given that you found the right therapist for you, it actually is an extremely validating place for anyone that has gone through different types of trauma, because oftentimes in a in a day-to-day level, when you open up to people that already knows you, meaning family, relatives, friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, it's a different kind of validation when you go to therapy. Because in therapy, okay, given that this therapist is like really good, they're supposed to be objective when it comes to your sessions, and everything that they say, it's supposed to be objective, not subjective. So what does that mean? Because when you say subjective, it's often attached, there's often an attached emotion or feeling or personal kind of opinions when someone is being subjective. But in therapy, they're supposed to be trained to approach you, or to, yeah, they're supposed to be trained to approach you objectively. So everything is like there's a system in place to help you or guide you through your traumas in life. And that's a good place because, for example, if you open, sometimes when we open up to family members, to friends, whether or not they mean it or whether or not it's conscious or unconsciously, sometimes the response that we get from family and friends are, they hurt us more than they help us, if you know what I mean. When you open up in therapy, you're not supposed to feel like you're being judged by someone. And that's oftentimes what we experience when we open up with friends and family. Your friends and family members have a personal attachment to you, so it's harder for them to kind of be objective when it comes to talking to you. So there's always a form of judgment. That's why if you don't want to be judged by anyone, by your friends and family, go to therapy, sis. So that's the main difference between going to therapy and opening up to your friends or family. It's objective versus subjective. So it's up to you. And also, another thing I want to kind of add to this point is that family and friends are not trained to guide you through your traumas and emotions. So most of the time, what you will get from family and friends are general advice or generally comforting words or encouraging words, which are extremely helpful. I'm not denying that. I have that in my life and I'm very grateful for those people. But what's great about therapy is that, for example, for me, I have anxiety, and sometimes, or actually a lot of times, when I'm outside, I get social anxiety. So when that happens, imagine if I go to a therapist versus I go to a family member. What a family member would do is say, they would hold my hand, they would tell me, hey, it's okay, I'm here for you, you can tell me anything. And that's very helpful. But in therapy, what happens is, when I told the therapist that I feel anxious, this is what I feel when I'm outside, how do I deal with this? What they tell me is, I'm given a specific skill / technique to actually address the anxiety. So it's not just general advice and support, but it's an actual specific technique. So an example of that is, when it comes to my anxiety, okay, I was taught this technique called ACE method, which is normally for intrusive thoughts or with anxiety, for example, because anxiety is all about, what's in your head. And ACE is a method where you will acknowledge, come back, and engage. So that's what A stands for. So you get a specific technique and skill to address your anxiety. But if you go to a family or friend, they will give you support or general support, which also helps. So at the end of the day, it's up to you. What kind of help do you want? For me, I need both in my life. Yeah, so what you get in therapy are actionable methods over generic advice from family and friends. And another thing, guys, this is also related to, I guess, validation and getting to verbalize your traumas. When you go to therapy, and this is like one of the kind of main issues when it comes to mental health and trauma, it's the big S words. It's shame, shame, shame. So when it comes to mental health issues and traumas, trauma and shame are like the, how do you call it, the power couple. And shama. So yeah, shame is always attached to trauma. A lot of people don't open up or don't ever address what they're going through because of shame. And I know that, I'm aware of that, I have that, I still have it. Shame is something that you feel because you feel embarrassed or you did something wrong. That's the key. You feel humiliated, you don't want to say it because you feel like you did something wrong. What's ironic about shame is that it's something that we all have in common, but we have no idea because we don't talk about it so often. It took a lot of years, but because I've always felt shameful that what I'm going through is only that I'm the only one who has gone through this shit, and that this is something that no one should ever know, because I feel like people will judge me. But through therapy and my own personal efforts, I get to win. So, to go to the question, do I need to go to therapy? In general, sis, the world needs therapy. Everyone in the world needs therapy, but not all of us have to go to therapy. Personally, because I know some people, just think about the previous generation, like my parents, your parents, their parents, our grandparents. They never had access to therapy, right? And they were able to go through their life, to live their life even fully, without having to go to therapy. And that is still applicable to this very day. But for me, given that I have an option, I have the opportunity and also the privilege to go to therapy, I couldn't find I could have gone I couldn't find any other methods that helps me address my issues directly. And also, it is based on your personality, because there are people that are extremely uncomfortable sitting down and talking to a complete stranger, and you're like, why the fuck should I tell you my issues? Like, who are you? And that's fine. There are people that are like that. You don't have to force yourself to go to therapy. But if you do, it requires, the thing is, that's why this is hard, because therapy requires commitment. The same way how, how other people that maybe they don't go to therapy, but they dedicate themselves in, let's say, working out, whatever their passion is in life. They help other people. Unfortunately, some people, they take drugs, alcohol, and have other forms of therapy for them. They spend a lot of money, all that, and they still get to live their life in general. So you have to assess yourself on whether or not you are committed to this kind of help, because there are other forms of help out there, and it doesn't have to be therapy. Actually, you know what, this is like one of the main this is like an issue that I have. When I started to seek therapy again last year, I had this resistance towards therapy, because I would compare myself with other people, or the way how other people are dealing with their issues. I told my therapist, like, I know a lot of people that they have issues. They have a lot of issues too. But how come, they don't have to go to therapy? They don't have to take medications. Why do I have to do this? Like, I think there's this guy where his therapist told him, just think about the things you could have done if you didn't go to therapy. Meaning, think about your other options if you didn't go to therapy. And if I tried to kind of internalize that, I'm like, oh my god, I could have done worse. Like, I could have, I could have I could have been an alcoholic or a drug addict but for me, what helps is therapy, medication, and my own personal efforts. So try to assess yourself what works for you, because at the end of the day, you know yourself better than other people. So do you need to go to therapy? I don't know. The answer is up to you. So the key here is finding something that actually works for you, that helps you move forward and live your best life. Wow, that's so generic. But yeah, that's my point, you guys. Find your kind of therapy. If therapy for you is, I don't know, traveling or working out or hanging out with your friends, just something that is not toxic and self-destructive, because there are people who do that, and I have done that. I did some things that I regret, because I didn't know how to address my traumas, and the only way for me to cope at the time was the self-destructive behaviors that I did. And now I found therapy, so I'm like, Do I choose those destructive things, or do I just go to therapy? And for me, I choose therapy. So thank you for listening to this episode and slash watching this episode. I hope you learned something from this and just have a small takeaway from it, and it helps you in your healing journey. If you have any other questions, feel free to send me a private message or send me a comment, and you can also suggest some topics that you have, and make sure to subscribe to my podcast and my YouTube channel. And yes, thank you so much. Bye.